Tonight we slip into the folds of medieval Georgia, a land of snow-dusted mountains, wine-dark valleys, and stone churches standing like stubborn guardians of time. Imagine the air scented with pine and incense, the hush of cloisters broken by the occasional toll of a bell. You're about to wander into a story of power and myth, of a queen whose life reads like an epic. But don't get too comfortable, you probably won't survive this court intrigue if you try to play it cool with the wrong nobleman. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're listening right now, drop your location and the local time in the comments. It's always fun to know where in the world you're drifting off to sleep from. Now, dim the light, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge through the rugged heart of the Caucasus Mountains in the 12th century, where paths are carved into rock and rivers slice through gorges like ribbons of silver. The Kingdom of Georgia feels both remote and radiant, its people toughened by geography, its culture enriched by trade routes brushing against Byzantium, Persia, and the steppe. This is a place of crossroads, where caravans bring silk, spices, and gossip in equal measure. And somewhere within the stone halls of Caucasus or Tbilisi, a child named Tamar is born to King George III and Queen Bygone. The year is 1160-something, scholars bicker whether it was 1160, 1166, or even later, because medieval scribes weren't always as diligent as your smartphone calendar. But what's not debated is that Tamar is born into a line of begratted rulers who have been stamping their authority on the region for generations. Her father, George III, is a warrior king, not the cuddliest dad in the kingdom. Picture a man more at home on horseback with a sword than reading bedtime stories. Still, he recognizes that his daughter will need more than silk dresses. She'll need a mind sharpened like a blade. You walk through the halls with her, hearing the echo of chanting monks. Education here is not a luxury but a survival kit. Tamar absorbs the Psalms, Greek philosophy, Georgian chronicles, and even a sprinkling of Persian poetry, because why settle for one cultural toolbox when you can raid them all? By candlelight, she learns to read not just words, but the room, the suspicious stares of uncles who think girls have no place on a throne, the whispers of noble families waiting for a misstep. And let's pause, because here's the quirky tidbit you wouldn't expect. Georgian royalty apparently took their wine so seriously that diplomatic letters sometimes included entire paragraphs on vineyard conditions. Imagine a medieval monarch stressing about the grape harvest while also worrying about Mongol raids. Tamar grows up in a world where vineyards matter as much as fortresses, and you can bet she picks up on that. Historians still argue whether Tamar's childhood was unusually sheltered inside the palace or whether she occasionally roamed among commoners incognito. The romantic in you wants to imagine her sneaking into a festival, tasting honey cakes, and listening to traveling storytellers spin tales about Alexander the Great. The cautious scholar in you shrugs. The sources are frustratingly vague. But the image of a princess weaving through torchlit crowds lingers, doesn't it? As you watch, she grows into a teenager with hair like burnished chestnut, her eyes reflecting both gentleness and a spark of calculation. She's not the kind of royal who flutters helplessly behind curtains. Instead, she sits in council meetings with her father, absorbing the rhythm of power, who speaks too long, who avoids eye contact, who hides ambition behind polite smiles. You lean closer and realize this is training, subtle but relentless. At court, the frescoes glow gold and crimson, but so do the rivalries. Noble families, the great clans like the Mkargadzeli, hover like hawks. Tamar must have felt their gaze as she practiced her calligraphy or listened to her tutors drone on about theology. And when you're a princess, every movement, how you bow, how you breathe, becomes political theater. Even the way she lifts a goblet might be judged as graceful or clumsy, a clue to whether she deserves to inherit the crown. Talk about performance anxiety. You wander into the gardens with her, where pomegranates split open under the sun and peacocks strut without shame. Here, away from the formalities, Tamar can laugh a little more freely. A monk might tell her that her name means palm tree, a symbol of strength and grace. She probably rolls her eyes, because what teenager doesn't, but part of her believes it too. The dawn of her story is not just about castles and crowns, it's about a girl realizing she carries centuries of expectation. You can almost hear her father muttering that nobles can be bought or broken, but legitimacy, that must be carved in stone and sung by poets. And so Tamar learns not just to be royal, but to be memorable. Still, shadows linger. By the time she reaches her mid-teens, the question of succession looms like a storm on the horizon. Can a woman really rule Georgia? Whispers swirl, some bold enough to suggest that when George III dies, Tamar should be set aside for a sturdier male cousin. You sip from an imaginary goblet and shake your head, same old patriarchy, different century. And yet, Tamar keeps walking those candlelit corridors, keeps listening, keeps filing away details for the day when it will matter most. The dawn is breaking, the mountains remain, and somewhere between prayer and politics, she is already rehearsing the role that history will demand. You trail alongside Tamar as the castle wakes at dawn, stone walls glowing orange in the sunrise, corridors alive with servants balancing trays of bread and pitchers of honeyed wine. She is no longer the small child tiptoeing after her tutors. She is a young woman caught in the uneasy balance between being adored as a princess and doubted as a potential ruler. The skepticism in the air is thick enough to slice with a dagger. Picture this: the great hall filled with nobles wrapped in fur-lined cloaks, their rings clinking on goblets as they mutter about succession. Some of them stroke their beards as if they're grooming their patience, but really, they're buying time until George III passes away. For these men, the idea of Tamar, a woman, wearing the crown is about as plausible as a goat being crowned bishop. And yet, the king insists on it. You can almost see him banging a fist on the council table, declaring Tamar as his heir, daring anyone to contradict him. You hover behind Tamar's shoulder during these tense meetings, and though her expression is calm, her mind must be racing. Every skeptical glance is like a test, and she knows the stakes. Her father even takes an unusual step for the time. He has her crowned as co-ruler while he's still alive. This double coronation, performed in 1178, is meant to silence opposition. But of course, it does the opposite. Now the nobles know exactly what they're up against. And here's a quirky little detail. The coronation ceremony likely involved not just the usual crowns and oaths but also a bit of symbolic foot-stomping. Georgians were big on physical gestures of loyalty, so don't be surprised if somewhere in the ceremony, nobles had to physically touch the king or queen's feet as a sign of submission. Awkward? Definitely. Effective? Sometimes. You walk with Tamar afterward, down echoing stone hallways where candlelight flickers against icons of saints. Imagine what it feels like to be crowned but not yet ruling, to know you are both celebrated and undermined in the same breath. It's like being given the keys to a luxury car and then being told you're not allowed to actually drive it without a dozen men supervising your every turn. George III tries to shield her from the harshest of the court's criticism, but Tamar isn't naive. She hears the whispers. Some nobles scoff that she's too pious, too soft, too inexperienced. Others murmur that a strong husband could guide her, which is basically code for replacing her authority with his. You glance at Tamar and see her tighten her jaw, the kind of silent defiance that doesn't need words. At the same time, Tamar learns to play the long game. Instead of lashing out at her doubters, she watches, listens, and memorizes who leans in her favor and who scowls behind her back. Her patience becomes a weapon, and you can almost sense her thinking, "Fine, underestimate me. It'll be more fun later when I prove you wrong." Historians still argue whether Tamar's mother, Queen Bygone, was a major influence on her political style. Some suggest Burdukan's strong Ossetian lineage gave Tamar both confidence and allies among the northern tribes. Others claim her mother died too early to shape much of her reign. The sources leave gaps big enough for speculation, and you're left imagining Tamar piecing together lessons from both parents, warrior ferocity from her father, diplomatic subtlety from her mother. Meanwhile, outside the palace, Georgia is buzzing with contradictions. Monasteries hum with prayer and scholarship, scribes laboring over parchment to preserve sacred texts. Traders crowd the markets with bolts of silk, glazed ceramics, and spices pungent enough to sting your nose. And beyond those bustling towns, rugged frontier lands simmer with threats, Turks, Persians, and restless tribes who view Georgia's wealth as ripe for plunder. Tamar grows up acutely aware that the throne is not just a seat, it's a fortress constantly under siege. And here's another delightfully odd tidbit. Georgian healers of the time swore by remedies that mixed prayer with, well, some questionable ingredients. Crocodile dung as a sunscreen substitute? Yep, some medical manuals actually mentioned it. You can imagine Tamar politely declining that suggestion and sticking to veils instead. You walk into the chapel with her one evening. The scent of beeswax and frankincense fills the air, the flicker of oil lamps casting shadows across painted saints. She kneels, lips moving silently. Is she praying for patience, for wisdom, for a kingdom that will accept her? Or maybe just for the courage not to smack the next arrogant noble who questions her right to rule? Either way, you sit in the back pew, feeling the hush of the space settle into your bones. Outside, the political game grows sharper. George III ages, his health faltering, and nobles grow bolder. Tamar stands taller now, a figure of quiet resilience. Her co-rulership is less about shared power and more about rehearsal. Every council meeting, every procession, every ceremonial duty is a practice run for the moment she will no longer be standing beside her father but instead standing alone. You lean close and notice how carefully she performs her role, never too arrogant, never too meek. She threads the needle, embodying a balance that makes it impossible to dismiss her outright. And yet, you can sense her impatience. It's like watching someone trained for battle forced to sit in the stands, waiting for the trumpet to sound. The unlikely heir grows into herself beneath the vaulted ceilings and beneath the weight of suspicion. Every whispered doubt becomes fuel, every narrowed eye another reason to sharpen her resolve. And though the path ahead will twist with betrayal, rebellion, and heartbreak, you feel the inevitability building. Tamar may be doubted, but she will not be denied. The throne room feels colder without George III. The stone pillars rise like silent witnesses as the news spreads. The king is dead, and Tamar, his daughter, his co-ruler, now stands alone as sovereign of Georgia. You shuffle closer, the scent of incense still clinging to your cloak, and you feel the weight that suddenly presses down on her shoulders. The crown is no longer a rehearsal prop. It is heavy, real, and laced with danger. The coronation itself is grand but tense. Nobles gather in their finest robes, some with smiles too wide, others with lips pressed thin. Bishops intone prayers that echo through the cathedral like thunder, voices mingling with the distant ringing of bells. Tamar kneels, the crown lowered onto her head, and for a moment the world holds its breath. A woman, alone, wears the crown of Georgia. You can almost hear the grinding of teeth from the lords who think this is all a mistake. And yet, the people outside the cathedral rejoice. Markets overflow with toasts and cheers. Children dart through streets waving scraps of cloth like banners. For common folk, Tamar represents continuity, a living link to the royal line. It's the nobles, those power-bloated aristocrats, who whisper behind carved doors. Their mutterings are sharp as daggers. She'll be weak. She'll be pliable. She'll bend to our will. Historians still argue whether Tamar initially tried to appease these nobles out of strategy or necessity. Some chronicles paint her as soft in her first years, leaning heavily on advisors and hesitant to assert herself. Others insist she was quietly biding her time, letting the overconfident lords dig their own graves. Either way, you see her standing at council, hands steady even when her voice trembles. She knows eyes are watching for cracks. One figure looms large in this drama, Kutlu Arslan, a noble who pushes for the creation of something like a medieval parliament. Imagine that, a group of aristocrats wanting to clip the queen's power and turn themselves into co-rulers. On parchment, it sounds progressive. In reality, it's self-interest dressed in fine words. Tamar listens, nods politely, and then, with almost eerie calm, sidesteps the scheme. Kutlu Arslan is arrested, the movement fizzles, and you realize this queen has sharper claws than anyone expected. Here's your quirky tidbit for the night. Georgian coronation banquets often featured massive roasted sturgeon carried into the hall whole, garnished with herbs, pomegranates, and maybe the occasional lemon if trade ships had been kind. Imagine trying to eat your way through that while worrying whether half the room wants to depose you. Stress eating on a royal level. You stroll through the palace corridors as Tamar walks past frescoes of saints with golden halos. The saints look calm, unbothered. Tamar, on the other hand, is learning that power is a minefield. Nobles test her with veiled insults, with subtle refusals to carry out orders. Some arrive late to court, daring her to discipline them. Each incident is like a spark threatening to set the kingdom ablaze. And yet, you notice her response: restraint, patience, the occasional surprising smile. She doesn't storm through the hall with threats, at least, not yet. Instead, she chooses allies carefully, leaning on loyal families like the Mkargadzeli clan, whose support will prove crucial. Slowly, she assembles her own network, a chessboard of loyalty and calculation. Still, there's the pressing question everyone whispers about: marriage. A single woman on the throne is a political liability, a tantalizing opportunity for any ambitious noble house or foreign power. The nobles begin parading candidates before her, each one more politically convenient than the last. You can almost hear the collective sighs when Tamar doesn't rush to pick one. But eventually, under mounting pressure, she will have to choose or be forced. You catch a glimpse of her late at night, perhaps in the candlelit chapel again, fingers clasped tight. Is she praying for guidance, for strength, or simply for the absurdity to stop that endless stream of power-hungry men jostling for control of her crown through marriage proposals? You almost want to whisper, "Hang in there, they'll regret underestimating you." Meanwhile, Georgia itself continues to bustle. Pilgrims trek to monasteries perched on cliffs, where monks illuminate manuscripts with painstaking care. Traders haggle over bolts of brocade, spices, and even falcons for hunting. The kingdom hums with energy, but beneath the hum lies unease. Nobles itch for more control, and Tamar, barely settled on her throne, already feels the ground shifting under her feet. And here's the kicker: despite the doubts, despite the power plays, the chronicles describe her as composed, serene even. Imagine that, your first years as queen, with vultures circling, and you manage to project the calm of a mountain lake. Maybe she cried in private, maybe she vented to trusted confidants, but outwardly, she was the embodiment of royal poise. You trail behind her as she walks through a sunlit courtyard, pigeons scattering at her steps, guards watching from the shadows. She lifts her head to the mountains in the distance. They have always been there, enduring, unshaken, weathering centuries of storms. And you sense she is trying to learn from them. Her reign is only just beginning, but already the lesson is clear: endurance is the queen's first weapon. The crown presses heavy, the lords mutter, and the kingdom watches. But Tamar stands. You're back in the echoing halls of the royal palace, where the question of Tamar's marriage is no longer a polite suggestion, it's a demand echoing from every corner of the noble court. To the aristocrats, the solution to a woman on the throne is obvious: marry her off quickly, strap a husband beside her, and let him do the ruling while she stands by in ceremonial silence. You sigh, because you already know Tamar won't play that game forever. Still, the pressure builds. Envoys arrive bearing gifts, noble families scheme in whispers, and the clergy mutters about propriety. Finally, a choice is made: Prince Yuri Bogolyubsky of Rus, the son of a dethroned prince from the north. On paper, he seems like a decent match. He brings ties to the Rus states, a splash of foreign prestige, and, importantly, he isn't one of the local nobles itching to grab the throne themselves. You stand beside Tamar as the marriage ceremony unfolds, probably around 1185. The cathedral glows with candlelight, incense smoke curling upward like nervous sighs. Tamar's golden robes gleam, Yuri's armor shines, and choirs sing hymns that echo off the vaulted ceilings. The crowd watches, some genuinely hopeful, others smirking at the thought that Georgia has finally acquired a manly ruler through the back door. But the reality? Yuri is no fairy tale prince. Within months, rumors trickle through the palace corridors. He's brash, arrogant, fond of drink, and, according to chroniclers, unkind to the queen. One account even suggests he was violent, though details are sparse and wrapped in medieval gossip. What's certain is that he lacked the tact and charisma needed to win Georgian hearts. Instead of being her partner, he becomes her problem. Here's your quirky tidbit: Georgian wedding feasts of the era were legendary for their length. We're talking several days of roasted lamb, overflowing wine, and enough toasts to leave even hardened warriors wobbling. Imagine Tamar, politely sipping while nobles stumble through odes to the new royal couple, secretly calculating how to manage this new husband who already looks like more of a liability than an asset. You trail after the couple in the weeks that follow. Tamar walks with her usual composure, but her eyes sometimes flicker with frustration. Yuri seems restless in Georgia's court, like a wolf in a peacock's cage. Instead of winning allies, he irritates them. Instead of supporting Tamar, he often undermines her. Nobles who already doubted her now find fuel in his presence. See, they mutter, this proves she can't rule alone. Historians still argue whether Tamar genuinely tried to make the marriage work or whether she knew from the start it was a political necessity she would eventually undo. Some chronicles praise her patience, noting she endured Yuri's behavior longer than most rulers would have tolerated. Others hint she was biding her time, waiting for the right moment to cast him aside. Either way, it's clear that this union is a mismatch. And the kingdom notices. Behind monastery walls, monks write cautious lines about domestic discord. In marketplaces, gossip flows faster than wine. For common Georgians, the Queen's marriage is not a distant spectacle, it's a source of national pride or embarrassment. When the royal couple appears in public, you can almost hear the unspoken question hanging in the air: is this really the man to share our Queen's throne? The answer comes swiftly enough: no. Tamar, quiet and calculating, begins gathering allies who will support her in the decision to dissolve the marriage. Divorce, in medieval Georgia, is no casual matter. It requires the backing of bishops, nobles, and legal precedent. Yet Tamar manages it, and before long, Yuri is sent packing. But the divorce sets the stage for bigger storms. Humiliated and angry, Yuri doesn't fade into obscurity. He becomes a rallying figure for rebellious nobles who still crave to curb Tamar's authority. The seeds of civil strife are planted, and you feel the air in the palace tighten, like the stillness before thunder. Meanwhile, Tamar keeps up appearances. She attends religious festivals, patronizes monasteries, and greets foreign envoys with the same regal poise. To the outside world, she is serene. Inside, she is preparing for confrontation. The young queen has tasted both the weight of a crown and the bitterness of a political marriage gone wrong. And she is beginning to realize that if she is to rule, it must be on her own terms. You find yourself walking with her in the palace gardens one dusky evening. The peacocks call, fountains trickle, and the scent of roses lingers in the air. She moves slowly, a hand brushing the leaves, her face calm. But beneath that calm lies calculation. You can sense it. The unlikely air has grown sharper, stronger. She is no longer the girl doubted at coronation, nor the bride who smiled politely at a feast. She is the sovereign who is quietly, but firmly, claiming her throne. And Yuri, he'll be back, bringing rebellion with him. But that's tomorrow's battle. Tonight, Tamar walks under the stars, and you walk beside her, marveling at how power can be both fragile and unstoppable in the same breath. The gardens are hushed tonight, but you know the peace won't last. Word drifts in from the provinces, rebellion. Yuri, the discarded husband, hasn't slunk away quietly. Instead, he's found allies among nobles who were already itching to claw power back from Tamar. They rally under his banner, declaring that a woman alone cannot rule Georgia. You rub your temples. Medieval men really never ran out of ways to underestimate women, did they? Picture this: dusty roads alive with horsemen carrying banners, the clatter of armor echoing through narrow valleys. Yuri, embittered but emboldened, returns like a bad sequel no one asked for. He gains support from discontented nobles and some foreign mercenaries, convincing them that with him in charge, Georgia will be stronger. What he doesn't mention, of course, is his fondness for wine and a tendency to alienate just about everyone he meets. Tamar, meanwhile, doesn't panic. She gathers her loyalists quietly, focusing especially on the Mkargadzeli brothers, Zachariah and Ivain, stalwart generals whose loyalty and brilliance on the battlefield will soon prove decisive. In the candlelit chambers of the palace, you watch her convene councils. Nobles argue, priests murmur, scribes scratch frantically with their quills. Through it all, Tamar sits serene, listening. When she finally speaks, her words are calm, measured, but edged with steel. Here's a quirky tidbit to lighten the mood. During wartime, Georgians believed that carrying bread baked with holy water into battle would ensure victory. Imagine soldiers stuffing flatbread into their saddlebags next to swords and bows, a crunchy insurance policy against defeat. But back to the tension. Yuri's forces push forward, and the threat is real. This isn't just a personal feud, it's a test of Tamar's right to rule. If she falters now, she risks losing everything: the throne, the kingdom, even the fragile acceptance she's built among her people. Historians still argue whether Tamar personally directed military campaigns or if she primarily delegated to her generals. Some sources hint at her presence near the front, blessing troops and rallying morale. Others suggest she remained in fortified cities, orchestrating strategy from afar. Either way, the chronicles agree on one thing: her steady hand guided the defense, and her confidence inspired loyalty. You ride with the loyalist army as they march to confront the rebels. The air smells of horse sweat and pine resin. Drums beat a slow, steady rhythm, and the men chant hymns that rise above the clang of weapons. Somewhere in the distance, the rebel banners snap in the wind, Yuri's forces waiting. The clash is inevitable. And when it comes, it's decisive. Georgian chronicles relish in describing how the rebels were scattered, their forces broken like pottery smashed against stone. Yuri flees, his proud words silenced by the thunder of hooves and the cries of defeat. You watch soldiers chase him through mountain passes, only for him to vanish into obscurity once more, though you know he'll crawl back again like a stubborn weed. The aftermath is sweet relief. Tamar emerges from the crisis not weakened, but stronger than ever. The nobles who doubted her now see the writing on the wall: this queen is no puppet. She is capable of defending her crown, of rallying the kingdom, of standing firm where others would have bent. The rebellion meant to destroy her instead forges her authority like iron in a furnace. You linger with her in the palace afterward. The air is warm with the scent of beeswax candles, the flicker of light glinting off golden icons. Tamar offers prayers of thanks, her voice low, her posture humble. She knows victory isn't just her own, it belongs to her allies, her generals, her people. But make no mistake, this is also her triumph. And here's another odd little note. Chronicles claim that after the rebellion, Tamar made generous donations to monasteries, commissioning frescoes and manuscripts. Imagine her writing the checks of her day, except instead of dollar signs, she's handing over land, gold, and the resources to cover walls in luminous saints. A way of saying thank you to God, and also a clever PR move linking her reign with divine favor. As you walk through the echoing halls, you realize something has shifted. The girl once doubted as an unlikely heir has now proven she can weather storms. Her divorce and Uri's rebellion could have shattered her reign, but instead, they've become the foundation of her authority. She's no longer just Tamar, the daughter of George III. She is Tamar the sovereign, a queen in her own right. And yet, you sense more storms gathering beyond the horizon. Uri isn't finished, and neither are the nobles who cling to him. But Tamar, she's ready. Her composure is unshaken, her authority reinforced, and you can't help but smirk. If this was the test, she's passed with flying colors. The rebellion may have erupted like wildfire, but Tamar has learned to walk through flames without being burned. The smoke of rebellion hasn't fully cleared when Tamar makes her boldest move yet. The nobles expect her to retreat into caution, to tiptoe through the corridors of power, grateful merely to have survived. But you walk with her, and you feel the opposite. Her stride is firmer now, her gaze unshakable. The rebellion has tested her, and instead of breaking, she's tempered like steel. She begins by addressing the root of the problem, Uri. The ex-husband turned rebel has scuttled back into exile, but Tamar ensures his claims are severed beyond repair. A council convenes, bishops chanting, scribes scratching away. The verdict is final, her marriage to Uri is dissolved, the divorce declared lawful. In a medieval world where marriage was often indissoluble, this is extraordinary. It's Tamar saying with regal calm, I will not be chained by a man who diminishes me. And what's more impressive, she doesn't fall into the trap of vindictiveness. Instead of crushing Uri's supporters with ruthless punishment, she shows mercy. Nobles who bent to his cause are fined, sometimes stripped of lands, but many are pardoned and restored. You tilt your head, impressed. Tamar isn't just trying to win battles, she's trying to win loyalty, and she knows that vengeance often breeds more rebellion. Here's your quirky tidbit. Tamar reportedly favored rewarding loyalty with feasts and gifts so lavish that some nobles left her banquets staggering under the weight of gold vessels and fine garments. Picture a medieval party bag, but instead of candy and stickers, you walk away with an embossed silver goblet and a new horse. Meanwhile, her generals, those steadfast Mkagadzeli brothers, cement their place as her right-hand men. Zachariah in particular shines, a commander whose victories will soon stretch Georgia's borders. Tamar knows how to use talent, and instead of being threatened by strong men, she empowers them. You can almost hear her whisper to herself, let them win glory on the battlefield, while I win hearts in the court. Historians still argue whether Tamar's measured mercy came from genuine piety or sharp political instinct. Was she truly a saintly ruler guided by compassion, or a strategist who realized that leniency brought more stability than terror ever could? The chronicles lean toward holiness after all. Many wanted to canonize her later. But you can sense the blend, faith and calculation, woven seamlessly. And now, freed from Uri's shadow, Tamar begins to fully assert her authority. She expands her patronage of the church, commissioning frescoes where she herself is depicted alongside saints. Imagine stepping into a monastery and seeing not just Christ and Mary glowing in gold leaf, but also your queen, haloed and regal. Talk about branding. But Tamar doesn't stop there. She summons her nobles, not with the meekness they once expected, but with quiet confidence. In councils, her voice rings clear. Policies are debated, taxes levied, armies provisioned, all under her steady hand. By the late 1180s, you can feel it, the transformation is complete. Tamar is not a figurehead. She is the undisputed ruler. Let's not forget Uri, though. Like a bad penny, he pops up again. Around 1191, he returns with another rebellion, stirring up yet another army of discontents. You groan, it's like watching a drama series with the same villain reappearing every season. But this time, Tamar and her loyal generals are ready. At the Battle of Tmogvi, Uri's forces crumble. Chronicles say he fled once more, a would-be usurper reduced to a footnote. You ride back to Tbilisi with Tamar after the victory. The city bursts into celebration, bells ring from the churches, dancers spin in the squares, musicians pound drums until your chest vibrates. Tamar's rule is no longer in question. She has faced rebellion, stared down betrayal, and emerged radiant. Here's the thing, Georgia is changing too. You pass through bustling markets where traders from Byzantium, Armenia, and Persia jostle for space. You hear polyphonic chants wafting from churches, their harmonies so intricate they sound almost otherworldly. You see stone masons carving delicate vine patterns into church facades, a style that will become distinctly Georgian. Tamar's reign is already feeding a golden age, even as the ink on rebellion's treaties is still drying. One evening, you follow her into a private chamber where the windows open to the dark sweep of the Caucasus Mountains. The night air is cool, the stars so sharp they look like pinpricks in velvet. She stands there, quiet, her crown set aside. You wonder what she feels in that silence, exhaustion, relief, or perhaps the thrill of knowing she's won. Maybe all three. From now on, Tamar is no longer just queen by inheritance. She is queen by triumph. Her authority doesn't rest solely on her father's crown, but on her own victories, her own resilience. She has carved her legitimacy out of rebellion's fire. And while nobles once muttered she was too weak, now they bow a little deeper, their voices a little humbler. You smile to yourself, remember how they once doubted the girl crowned beside her father. Those days are gone. Tamar has walked through the storm, and instead of drowning, she's learned to sail. The air in the royal court feels lighter now, though the responsibilities pressing on Tamar have only grown heavier. With Uri finally out of the picture, the question of marriage returns, this time less as a political chokehold and more as an opportunity. Nobles, foreign envoys, even clergymen buzz with curiosity. Who will share the throne with her, if anyone? You sit beside her in the council chamber as proposals once again flutter across the table. Princes from Byzantium, lords from Armenia, even candidates from distant European courts are whispered about. Each name comes with advantages, alliances, and of course, hidden traps. Tamar listens politely, sips her wine, and files the names away. But she doesn't rush. She knows too well the cost of a hasty choice. Then enters David Soslan, a prince of Alan descent, tall, broad-shouldered, and, according to chronicles, both charismatic and fiercely loyal. His lineage is noble, his people, the Alans of the northern Caucasus, are longtime allies, and his reputation as a warrior precedes him. To many, he seems an odd candidate compared to the glittering dynasties of Byzantium or Persia. To Tamar, he seems exactly right. You watch their marriage ceremony unfold in 1189. This time the cathedral glows not with tense expectation but with genuine hope. Tamar, regal in her golden robes, stands beside David, whose hand rests lightly over hers. The choir's voices swell, and instead of skepticism, you feel a ripple of confidence coursing through the room. It isn't just a union of two people, it's a signal that Tamar chooses her own path. Here's your quirky tidbit. Georgian weddings often included a symbolic ritual where a bride and groom circled a fire 3 times, an echo of ancient pagan customs still blended into Christian practice. Imagine Tamar, the mighty queen, stepping gracefully around flames, the firelight painting her face while courtiers whisper prayers. A rare glimpse of tradition uniting old and new. This marriage is different from the last in every way. David is not a rival, not a puppet master, not a thorn in her side. He is a partner. Chronicles describe him fighting by her side, commanding armies with skill, and most importantly, never trying to overshadow her authority. You can almost hear Tamar exhale with relief. After years of doubt and betrayal, she has found someone who strengthens her instead of undermining her. Historians still argue whether theirs was a love match or a political masterstroke. Was Tamar genuinely enamored with David's strength and character, or was she simply recognizing the strategic value of an Allen prince? The truth, as always, probably blends the two. But you can't deny the warmth described in accounts of their partnership. This wasn't the cold formality of Uri, it was something closer to real companionship. And Georgia notices. Nobles breathe easier knowing their queen now has a warrior consort. Soldiers march with greater confidence, certain that David's leadership will sharpen their edge in battle. Priests smile, chroniclers scribble furiously, and in the taverns of Tbilisi, men raise their cups to Tamar and David. The realm feels steadier, brighter. You follow Tamar through her palace gardens one morning after the wedding. The fountains splash, roses climb trellises, and for the first time in a while, her face seems lighter. She speaks with David at her side, the two walking close enough that their hands nearly brush. Their voices murmur about strategy, about roads and fortresses, about poetry even. This is no ordinary queen and consort dynamic, it's a genuine partnership of minds. Under their joint authority, the kingdom begins to expand in confidence. David leads campaigns to the north and west, his victories sung by bards. Tamar pours her attention into the court, the church, and diplomacy, weaving networks of loyalty that stretch across the Caucasus. Together, they embody both strength and wisdom, sword and scroll. Here's another curious tidbit. David Soslan supposedly brought with him a small entourage of Allen warriors, fierce horsemen who became a kind of elite guard in Georgia. Imagine them, tall, fur-caped, with long swords and booming laughter, standing watch in the palace halls, a foreign accent mingling with Georgian commands. The queen's household suddenly feels broader, more cosmopolitan. And yet, for all the grandeur, Tamar never loses her poise. Even in marriage, she remains sovereign. Chroniclers are clear, David is her right hand, not her master. You admire the balance, where so many rulers fall into rivalry with their consorts, Tamar finds harmony. One evening, you sit in on a feast. The hall is alive with the scent of roasted meats and spiced wine, the drone of instruments weaving through the air. Tamar lifts her goblet, David beside her. The courtiers cheer, the musicians strike up a tune, and you feel the warmth of triumph. After storms of doubt, rebellion, and failed marriage, Tamar has found a second chance, not just in love, but in power itself. And perhaps, just perhaps, she smiles knowing that the skeptics who once muttered about her weakness now must admit she has it all: authority, loyalty, and a partner who rides into battle for her name. You're back in Tbilisi, the city buzzing with life as if it has woken from a long nap. Tamar's rule is no longer fragile or questioned, her reign is in full bloom, and the royal court gleams like a gemstone at the center of Georgia's cultural golden age. The air is heavy with the scent of wine and fresh bread, but also with something more intangible, a hum of creativity, debate, and invention. You step through the palace doors and into the great hall, and it feels less like a throne room and more like an academy of brilliance. Poets sit shoulder to shoulder with monks, military commanders with musicians. A philosopher gestures wildly with one hand while holding a fig in the other, trying to convince a skeptical noble that the universe has no end. A scribe scratches furiously on parchment, pausing only to chew on the end of his quill. And Tamar, seated on her golden throne, listens not as a detached monarch, but as someone who genuinely loves stories, words, and ideas. This is where one of Georgia's most legendary writers, Shota Rustaveli, comes into your view. You catch him standing nervously in a corner, scroll in hand, before eventually reciting verses from his masterpiece, The Night in the Panther's Skin. The poem sings of love, loyalty, and adventure across distant lands, and Tamar herself becomes immortalized within its dedication. Think about that for a moment. Not only is Tamar shaping her kingdom politically, she's being enshrined in literature that will echo for centuries. Here's your quirky tidbit. Rustaveli supposedly painted his own portrait in a monastery fresco, just so future generations wouldn't forget his face. Imagine sneaking into a chapel centuries later and seeing a medieval poet's little selfie glaring down at you, humble, and yet not really. The court doesn't stop at poetry. You hear chants rising from choirs practicing in side chambers, rehearsing harmonies so complex that later musicologists will scratch their heads trying to explain them. Georgian polyphonic singing, a tradition already ancient in Tamar's time, reaches new heights here. 3. Sometimes 4 voices weave together in ways that sound both ethereal and mathematical. If Spotify existed in the 12th century, this would be topping the charts. And then there are the builders. Tamar commissions grand churches and monasteries, each stone carrying not just faith but also artistry. You wander into Gelati Monastery, its walls shimmering with mosaics and frescoes, saints rendered in brilliant blues and reds. One scholar whispers that the dome was deliberately designed to capture sunlight at dawn, flooding the altar in gold. Historians still argue whether Tamar herself chose that design, or if it was her architects. Either way, the result is breathtaking. The queen doesn't just fund grandeur for grandeur's sake, she uses culture to knit her kingdom tighter. Monks write chronicles that glorify Georgia's history. Artists decorate manuscripts with tiny, jewel-like illuminations. Even food becomes part of this cultural fabric. Imagine platters of khachapuri, cheese-filled bread, sliding across banquet tables, paired with wines stored in clay kvevi buried in the ground. Yes, Georgians were perfecting wine storage long before hipster wineries rediscovered clay fermentation pots. You follow Tamar into a smaller, more private chamber one evening. The torches flicker as she listens to a monk reading aloud not about war or taxes, but about philosophy. Her eyes close slightly, as if savoring the words the same way one savors good wine. This is a queen who doesn't just tolerate art, she needs it, thrives on it, insists her kingdom does too. Of course, with so much flourishing, the gossip wheels never stop spinning. Rumors fly about court romances, patronage rivalries, and poets vying for Tamar's attention. One anecdote claims a lesser bard tried to outshine Rustaveli at a feast, only for the queen to politely clap and then turn back to her favorite. That's basically the medieval version of being politely ghosted. What's striking, though, is that this isn't just a cultural bubble in the palace. The prosperity ripples outward. Markets bustle with traders from Persia, Byzantium, and the steppe. You hear snippets of Armenian, Arabic, Greek, and Turkic tongues mingling with Georgian in the streets. Tamar's Georgia is a crossroads, and the energy of exchange infuses everything. There's also a religious side. Tamar, deeply pious, funds not only lavish cathedrals but also the translation of theological works. Monks in candlelit rooms hunch over texts, carefully copying ideas from Greek and Syriac sources into Georgian script. For them, preserving knowledge is a holy duty. You imagine their cramped fingers, ink-stained robes, and whispered prayers for accuracy. Without them, vast worlds of thought might have been lost. And let's not forget the humor of it all. Picture a feast where nobles brag about military exploits, and then Rustaveli drops a veiled joke about how love conquers all, even kings. Everyone laughs, except the general who just spent 3 years away fighting. Courts, like any workplace, had their office comedians and their awkward silences. Still, the impression you leave with is that Tamar's reign creates a space where creativity feels safe, even celebrated. For once, a queen's court isn't just about politics, it's about possibility. Georgia is not only powerful on the battlefield but radiant in spirit. As you step out of the palace into the cool night air, you hear faint singing drifting from a tavern down the street. Farmers, merchants, maybe even a wandering poet are harmonizing, their voices intertwining in the signature Georgian style. The stars glitter above, the city glows below, and you realize Tamar's legacy isn't only in crowns and armies, it's in the songs that echo through the night, the stories told long after the wine jugs run dry. You swing yourself up into the saddle, the leather creaking under your weight, and suddenly you're no longer in the candlelit court but out in the open, riding under the sun with Tamar's armies. The horizon stretches across rugged mountains and deep valleys, the Caucasus rising like jagged teeth in the distance. Dust swirls behind the hooves, and the clang of armor mixes with the barked commands of generals. This isn't just ceremonial pomp anymore, this is a queen who leads a kingdom into war, and you're trotting along in the middle of it. Tamar's rule has solidified, but peace was never guaranteed. To her south, Muslim empires eyed Georgia's wealth, to the east, rival princes schemed, and to the north, nomadic steppe riders always seemed to test the borders. Yet Tamar doesn't flinch. She places trusted commanders in charge, including her husband, David Soslan, who proves not just a consort but a battle-hardened partner. Together, they turn Georgia into a military powerhouse. One of the most famous campaigns unfolds in 1195 at Shamka, where Georgian forces clash with the armies of the Eldeguzids of Azerbaijan. You picture the battlefield, a plain shimmering in heat, banners fluttering crimson and gold, and the ground trembling with the charge of Georgian cavalry. According to chronicles, Tamar orders her generals to march not only for victory but for justice, insisting their cause is righteous. And here's the mainstream fact: the Georgians crush their enemies so decisively that the Eldeguzid capital of Ganja falls, filling Tamar's treasury with riches. But here comes the quirky bit. Rumor has it that after victory, Tamar distributed a portion of the spoils directly to the poor and even to monasteries, as if victory itself should be shared. Imagine if every modern politician promised, "We won the war, here's a free pizza for everyone." It wouldn't fix inflation, but morale would skyrocket. Georgia's expansion doesn't stop. Campaigns surge into Armenia, Shirvan, and even parts of Anatolia. Tamar's generals seize fortresses, redirect trade routes, and secure access to the Black Sea. Suddenly, you're standing on a windswept coastal bluff, watching Georgian banners ripple where foreign ones once flew. The kingdom has become not just a regional player, but a dominant power stretching from the Caspian to the Black Sea. Historians still argue whether Tamar herself was physically present on these campaigns or if she coordinated from Tbilisi. The chronicles are tantalizingly vague. Some depict her riding in a chariot, leading by divine presence. Others suggest she remained in the palace while David Soslan took the field. But whether she's in armor or on a throne, her influence is undeniable. The soldiers fight in her name, and victories are attributed to her blessing. The Queen's armies weren't just brute force, they were terrifyingly organized. Heavy cavalry, decked out in chainmail and lamella armor, thundered across the plains. Infantry carried curved sabers and long spears, shields gleaming in sunlight. Archers, perched on hillsides, loosed arrows in synchronized volleys that darkened the sky. One contemporary source describes Georgian cavalry as a wall of iron that broke through enemy lines like waves smashing a sandcastle. And you can practically hear the enemy thinking, "Yep, this is not my day." But here's another curious anecdote. Tamar supposedly prayed for every soldier by name before major campaigns. Considering some of these armies numbered in the tens of thousands, That's either devotion or a very long evening of roll call. Still, soldiers believed it gave them divine protection. The wars weren't without cruelty, though. Siege warfare meant starvation, disease, and endless waiting. You find yourself outside a besieged city, smelling smoke from burning fields, hearing the distant cries of defenders behind walls. Months could pass like this. Yet Tamar's commanders often preferred negotiation to outright destruction. Cities that surrendered quickly were frequently spared massacre. Was this calculated strategy or genuine mercy? Hard to say, but it certainly encouraged others to lay down arms faster. As Georgia's borders expand, so does its reputation. Envoys from distant lands arrive in Tbilisi to bow before Tamar's court. You hear accents from the Crusader states, Persia, Byzantium, even the faraway Kipchaks of the steppe. One delegation awkwardly presents Tamar with a giraffe, because apparently nothing says we respect your empire quite like delivering the medieval equivalent of a zoo exhibit. And just imagine the whispers in Europe, tales of a Christian queen ruling armies and defeating Muslim sultans. In an age when most female rulers were underestimated or outright dismissed, Tamar becomes something of a legend. Chroniclers dub her King Tamar to emphasize that her authority was not lesser than a man's. The title sticks, though modern ears can't help but chuckle at the idea of a queen being upgraded by paperwork. Still, all the military success has side effects. Nobles who once doubted Tamar now clamor for her attention, hoping to secure governorships in the newly conquered territories. The palace begins to resemble a medieval job fair, with ambitious lords pushing resumes, well, not resumes, but bribes, flattery, and boasts. You almost expect Tamar to sigh and say, "No, we don't have any openings for Duke of Armenia this week, try again later." Despite the politics, the sense of national pride is unmistakable. Ordinary Georgians walk taller, markets overflow with goods, and farmers hum songs about Tamar while tending vineyards. The country feels like it belongs not only to a monarch, but to a shared dream. You glance around and realize that this golden age isn't just myth, it's tangible, pulsing in the streets and echoing in the hills. Yet victories also bring enemies. Alliances shift, neighbors grow jealous, and whispers of revenge spread like wildfire. Tamar's armies might rest for now, but the horizon is never empty. War drums still echo faintly in the distance, reminding you that every golden age has its shadows. And as you tighten your grip on the reins, riding alongside banners snapping in the wind, you feel it too, the thrill of power, the fragility of peace, and the certainty that Tamar's Georgia is a kingdom both admired and feared. You step off the dusty battlefield and into a space shimmering with candlelight and color, where instead of steel and blood you're surrounded by gold leaf and fresh plaster. Georgia in Tamar's age isn't only about armies thundering across the plains, it's also about temples, frescoes, and treasures that make you feel as though you've wandered into a dream painted by angels with very expensive paintbrushes. The country's victories bring not just land but wealth, and Tamar channels that wealth into art and architecture. One of her crown jewels is the Vardzia cave monastery, carved right into the side of a cliff. Imagine standing there row after row of stone chambers honeycombing the rock, stairways zigzagging upward, and a great church at the center, its walls glowing with frescoes of saints and one very regal Queen Tamar herself. You brush your fingers across the cool stone and realize that this place isn't just a monastery, it's a fortress, a treasury, and a statement: Georgia stands eternal. The mainstream fact here: Vardzia is considered one of the greatest monuments of medieval Georgia, and under Tamar it flourished. Pilgrims, monks, and scholars all flocked there. The walls were painted with biblical scenes, but tucked among them is Tamar's portrait in gold robes, her gaze calm, her crown impossibly detailed. She's not just sponsoring the art, she's literally stepping into history's paint palette. Then there's Gelati Monastery near Kutaisi, another jewel of her patronage. You step through its doors and are swallowed by mosaics that shimmer like liquid sunlight. Scholars of the time called Gelati the Second Jerusalem, which, honestly, is a bold Yelp review. And it wasn't just about the beauty, it was also an intellectual hub, home to a famous academy where philosophy, theology, and science were taught. Tamar poured resources into it, making sure Georgia wasn't only feared in battle but admired for wisdom. But here's the quirky tidbit. Chroniclers whisper that Tamar donated not only money but also rare objects captured in war, gilded icons, jeweled chalices, even relics, to churches across the realm. Imagine the after-battle loot inventory: one sword, one crown, and yes, one finger bone of Saint somebody. Send that to Gelati. You can almost picture the monks' delighted faces, half pious or half oh wow, this will look fantastic in the reliquary. Historians still argue whether Tamar personally designed or directed these projects, or whether she simply funded them. Some suggest she was deeply involved, dictating aesthetic choices like a medieval art director. Others think she delegated to architects and monks. Either way, her stamp is unmistakable, an insistence on grandeur that matched her kingdom's growing power. Treasures weren't just in stone walls. You duck into a treasury chamber, and the glitter nearly blinds you. Gold chalices studded with gems, enamel icons framed in silver filigree, silken vestments embroidered with threads so fine they seem alive in the candlelight. Chronicles tell of traveling envoys gaping at Georgia's riches, stunned that this relatively small kingdom could rival Byzantium in splendor. The Georgians loved enamel work, delicate panels painted with vivid blues, reds, and greens, locked into golden frames. Many of these pieces, still surviving today, look so fresh you'd think someone smuggled a modern paint set back through time. You pause at one relic in particular, the Karkuli triptych, a massive icon covered in over 100 enamel panels. It gleams like a galaxy shrunk down to a shrine. Tradition says Tamar was one of the patrons responsible for preserving and embellishing it. You lean closer, and it's almost like peering into a jewelry box the size of a wall. And the churches themselves aren't silent tombs of art, they're alive. You hear chants echoing through the domes, the low drone of polyphonic singing that seems to vibrate through your ribs. Georgian polyphony is haunting, 3 voices weaving into harmonies so unexpected they feel otherworldly. Imagine drifting to sleep under that sound. No wonder monks claimed it lifted the soul toward heaven. Of course, not everyone was impressed. Some nobles grumbled about Tamar spending too much coin on religious bling. They probably muttered things like, "Another gold mosaic? Really? How about fixing that bridge instead?" But Tamar ignored them. For her, adorning the kingdom's holy places was as much politics as piety. A glittering cathedral shouted, "We are powerful, we are blessed, and our queen has divine favor." It was propaganda you could see from miles away, literally glowing in the sunlight. Here's another curious legend. One tale claims Tamar once disguised herself to slip into a construction site at night, checking whether the masons worked diligently or slacked off. Whether true or not, it paints a fun picture: a queen wandering around scaffolding in the moonlight, probably shaking her head at lazy stonemasons while muttering, "Seriously, you call that mortar?" Outside the sanctuaries, secular architecture flourishes too. Fortresses rise on mountaintops, stone bridges arc across rivers, caravanserais buzz with merchants. You find yourself strolling through a Georgian town at dusk, streets alive with traders haggling over silk, incense wafting from spice stalls, and bells tolling from a half-finished church whose dome gleams in scaffolding. The whole place hums with prosperity. Yet, there's always debate. Was this truly Tamar's golden vision, or was she simply riding the momentum of earlier dynasties? Historians can't quite agree. Some argue her father George III laid much of the groundwork, while Tamar simply reaped the benefits. Others insist she transformed Georgia into something dazzlingly new. You shrug. Because honestly, standing inside a candlelit dome of blue and gold mosaics, the debate feels less important than the ore seeping into your bones. The treasures and temples aren't just relics of power, they're time machines. You close your eyes, hearing chants, feeling cool stone under your palms, smelling incense heavy in the air. You're not just looking at Tamar's world, you're inside it. And if gold and marble could whisper, you know what they'd say: remember who built this, remember her name. You slip away from the glittering frescoes and the incense haze, stepping instead into the dim hush of Tamar's private chambers. Outside, bells toll and scribes scratch quills across parchment, but here the air feels softer, touched with candle smoke and the faint scent of lavender oil rubbed into wooden chests. A queen's life isn't just parades and battles, it's also choices that twist the stomach, nights where you lie awake wondering whether the crown on your head is a halo or a set of chains. Tamar was powerful, more powerful than any Georgian monarch before her, but she was also a woman in a world where men kept the ledgers of power. Every decision she made had to slice through suspicion. When she showed mercy, whispers accused her of weakness. When she commanded armies, whispers accused her of being unfeminine. Basically, she couldn't win the gossip game, except she did, by ignoring it. The mainstream fact is this: Tamar's reign marked an unusual balance of compassion and authority. Chronicles repeatedly praise her as both king and queen, suggesting she blurred categories on purpose. She signed decrees with a royal hand and held audiences where petitioners, peasants, monks, even orphans, could air grievances. People called her the King of Kings and Queen of Queens. Sounds dramatic, but hey, if you're ruling half the Caucasus, you've earned the oversized title. Still, historians argue whether this image of a merciful, saintly queen was truth or carefully polished propaganda. Was Tamar genuinely soft-hearted, or did court chroniclers craft her into a medieval Disney princess to make her reign look heaven-approved? You tilt your head at the fresco of her serene face and wonder if behind those painted eyes she sometimes muttered, "I just yelled at 12 nobles today, where's my crown polish wine?" Her second marriage to David Soslan gave her stability, but marriage is never just romance, it's alliance, paperwork, and occasionally awkward dinners where you try not to discuss who betrayed whom last week. Together they projected a strong front, yet letters hint at Tamar carrying the heavier political load. Some scholars even suggest she chose David not only for his valor but because he was unlikely to overshadow her, a clever calculation in an era when ambitious husbands often tried to hijack the throne. Here's the quirky tidbit. Chroniclers claim Tamar had a habit of retreating to monasteries when the stress grew unbearable. Imagine it: one day you're issuing decrees about tax law, the next you're quietly praying in a cloister garden while birds hop along the cloister walls. Monks must have stared, thinking, the queen is sitting on that bench again, do we offer her tea or just pretend it's normal? It's a very human picture, a ruler sneaking moments of peace in between diplomatic earthquakes. Of course, palace intrigue never rested. Nobles jostled for influence, foreign envoys carried veiled threats wrapped in silk courtesies, and the Byzantine Empire, still licking its wounds, eyed Georgia with both envy and suspicion. Tamar had to weave alliances while keeping her own court from unraveling. It's like playing chess while the board itself keeps shifting under your feet. You wander through a council chamber in your imagination. The air smells of wax and parchment. Nobles lean on carved staffs, robes sweeping across mosaic floors. They argue loudly about taxes, about land grants, about whether to raid a neighbor or sign a treaty. At the head of the chamber Tamar sits, calm as a mountain lake, waiting for the noise to burn itself out before she speaks. And when she does, the room falls silent, not because she shouts, but because her quiet authority is louder than all their bluster. Yet authority had its cost. In private, Tamar is described as deeply pious, spending hours in prayer and fasting. You picture her slipping off jeweled crowns, pulling off rings heavy with gems, and kneeling barefoot on cold stone. For a woman wrapped in golden robes, that's a radical act, to remind herself she's dust and soul, not just sovereign. Some contemporaries claimed her humility bordered on saintly. Whether that's truth or court flattery, it paints a picture of someone constantly balancing cosmic weight on her shoulders. There's even a story, half legend, half history, that Tamar once disguised herself in men's clothes to travel incognito, checking on her subjects. Was it a real mission of royal espionage or just a folktale? Historians still argue. But you can't help smiling at the mental picture. Tamar in a rough cloak, strolling through a marketplace, probably laughing behind her hand as merchants bickered over onions, blissfully unaware the tall man with a weirdly elegant walk was their queen. By night, perhaps she told stories, yes, the same queen who swung armies and ordered cathedrals also spun tales. Chronicles hint she enjoyed literature and patronized storytellers. You imagine her children, George Losher and Rusudin, nestled close as she recounted epics of ancient kings or parables of saints. Maybe she even sprinkled in jokes, the kind only a tired parent can improvise. And then the dragon said, "I forgot my teeth at home." Her legacy wasn't only public monuments but also private ripples of kindness. There's a tale of Tamar pardoning prisoners during Easter, releasing them with gifts of food and clothing. Was it political theater? Maybe. But imagine being one of those prisoners, stepping out of a dank cell into sunlight, clutching bread and thinking, well, that turned out better than expected. Still, loneliness clung to her. Even surrounded by courtiers, Tamar's life must have felt isolating, like being the only chess queen on a board full of pawns and knights, all watching, all expecting you to move perfectly. The crown, heavy with gems, probably felt heavier in silence than in ceremony. You sit with her for a moment, in that quiet chamber, candlelight flickering against tapestries. You feel the tug between strength and gentleness, between the endless demands of power and the simple yearning for peace. And you realize that Tamar's greatness didn't just come from armies or temples, but from surviving that tug without breaking. The candles gutter low, shadows stretch, and you lean in as whispers float through stone corridors, whispers not of politics or battles, but of miracles and myths. Every great ruler gathers legends like dust on sandals, but Tamar's stories shimmer with a glow that feels half history, half bedtime fable. You're not sure where truth ends and imagination begins, but honestly, when you're drifting towards sleep, does it even matter? The mainstream fact is this: Queen Tamar quickly became more than a monarch in the eyes of her people. Chronicles describe her victories as divinely inspired, victories so decisive that scribes claimed heaven itself tilted in Georgia's favor. Take the famous Battle of Basiyan. Tamar's armies stormed against the Seljuk Turks, and the chronicles insist angels fought beside her soldiers. You can almost hear the clash of steel in the night, punctuated by ghostly wings overhead. Real? Symbolic? Either way, it's the kind of story that sticks like honey on the tongue. But myths don't stop at battles. One story insists that Tamar never truly died. According to legend, she rests in a secret tomb, hidden so perfectly that no one, invader or pilgrim, could ever find her. Some believe her body was spirited away to a remote cave, waiting for a time when Georgia needs her again. It's the medieval version of she's not gone, she's just on an epic nap. Historians still argue whether her burial was deliberately hidden to prevent desecration, or if the whole tale is wishful thinking spun after the fact. Either way, you get goosebumps imagining her crown gleaming in some forgotten cavern, untouched for centuries. Then there are visions, saints appearing in dreams, victories foretold by strange omens, Tamar glimpsed walking with halos of light. Chroniclers didn't just call her a queen, they called her a saint in waiting. At banquets, she was described as radiating kindness so intense that hardened generals supposedly softened in her presence. Was that poetic exaggeration or literal awe? Tough call. People have been known to embellish after a few goblets of wine. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some folk traditions claimed Tamar could calm storms just by praying. Imagine being a sailor on the Black Sea, waves crashing, ropes snapping, and suddenly someone shouts, "Don't worry, the Queen's got this." And, like a medieval weather app, she bows her head, whispers a prayer, and allegedly, the sky's clear. Meteorologists today would have a field day with that report. And yet, not all legends glow with holy polish. Some tales paint her as stern, almost otherworldly, a woman capable of wrath when justice demanded it. There's a story that she cursed a treacherous noble who refused to repent, and, according to the tale, his lands withered until he begged forgiveness. Did that actually happen, or was it medieval propaganda with a spooky soundtrack? Hard to say, but you admit it makes great fireside drama. You wander into a village square in your mind, centuries after her reign. A grandmother pulls children close, retelling how Queen Tamar defeated giants, tamed rivers, or disguised herself as a shepherd to test the kindness of strangers. The children gasp, eyes wide, as if the queen might stroll through the square any second, her cloak brushing dust from cobblestones. That's the thing about legends, they stretch across centuries like lullabies, softening the edges of reality until all that remains is wonder. Still, scholars keep poking at the puzzle. Was Tamar truly venerated as a saint in her lifetime, or did centuries of nostalgia sculpt her into a figure larger than life? Some argue the miracles attached to her name were borrowed from biblical templates, neatly stitched into her story to make her reign seem destined. Others say her genuine acts of mercy and justice naturally blossomed into myth, because when a ruler feels too good to be true, the people start filling in the gaps with fairy dust. As you listen to the swirl of tales, you can't help noticing how human needs shape myth. People facing invasions wanted a queen who could summon angels. Farmers praying for rain wanted a queen who spoke the language of storms. Children falling asleep wanted a queen who would never die, who would return in times of danger like an eternal guardian. Tamar became all those things, not just a ruler but a storybook stitched into the Georgian soul. You lean back, close your eyes, and almost hear her voice threading through time, half lullaby, half command. Be brave. Be just. And when in doubt, tell a good story. Legends, after all, are bedtime history at its most potent, where fact and fantasy snuggle under the same blanket. The warmth of myths fades, and now you feel a hush settle over the chamber. The queen who once strode across battlefields and courts begins to slow. You notice her shoulders no longer carry the same unstoppable force, though her gaze still shines sharp as a polished blade. Time spares no one, not even Tamar the Great. The mainstream fact is this: Queen Tamar reigned for nearly 3 decades, from 1184 until her death in 1213. That's a long stretch for a medieval ruler, especially given the constant stress of wars, diplomacy, and palace intrigue. By the early 1210s, chronicles suggest her health was waning. The records are vague, offering no neat diagnosis, just hints of weakness and suffering. And let's be honest, medieval doctors weren't exactly known for their bedside accuracy. They'd probably suggest balancing humors with leeches while offering prayers and herbal teas. But there's something strangely human about watching a figure of near-mythic power start to falter. You picture her court still bustling with poets, generals, and monks, while behind the curtains Tamar leans on cushions, her voice a little quieter, her movements slower. Her second husband, David Soslan, had died earlier, leaving her without the companion who once rode beside her into campaigns. The loss must have weighed heavily. Scholars still debate whether his absence shifted the balance of her court politics or whether Tamar's authority by then was so secure that nothing could shake it. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some later folk songs claim that Tamar foresaw her own death in a dream. Supposedly, she told her attendants not to fear because she would return when Georgia most needed her. Sounds dramatic, almost superhero-level dramatic, but that's exactly how legends grow. Despite her weakening body, Tamar didn't vanish from leadership. She continued overseeing matters of state, issuing decrees, and guiding her realm. Imagine that most people would call in sick for the slightest sniffle, but Tamar kept managing a kingdom with the stamina of someone who clearly missed the memo on retirement. Historians still argue whether she passed away in Tbilisi or in a remote monastery. Some accounts point to the royal palace at Tbilisi, others to the Gelati monastery in Kutaisi. And then, of course, there's that enduring legend we brushed against earlier, that her final resting place was hidden entirely, sealed in secrecy so that enemies could never desecrate it. Was she buried under church floors, deep in a cave, or somewhere yet undiscovered? Archaeologists keep guessing, but her tomb remains one of history's tantalizing mysteries. You can almost hear the morning bells ripple across valleys, the echoes carried on mountain winds. Georgia lost not just a ruler, but a symbol, someone who embodied the golden age of their nation. Imagine being a farmer who grew up under Tamar's reign, watching her armies protect your borders, her policies bring fairness, her patronage fill churches with dazzling frescoes. And then, one day, news trickles through: the queen has died. The silence afterward must have felt unbearable, like the air itself had grown heavier. But even in grief, her people clung to faith. Chroniclers describe her as saintly, her name slipping into prayer alongside biblical figures. For many Georgians, her reign wasn't just history, it was divine proof that their kingdom could shine like a jewel between empires. Her death didn't end that glow, it simply passed into memory, into legend, into the stories whispered by candlelight that still flicker today. You picture the last moments, a queen lying in her chamber, attendants whispering prayers, the air heavy with incense. Perhaps she looks past them, eyes unfocused, already reaching for something beyond the veil. And maybe, just maybe, she smiled, knowing she had done what few rulers in history ever managed, leaving behind a realm stronger, brighter, more confident than she had found it. The candle wicks sputter, shadows dance, and you sense the waning candle of her life, its light gentle but enduring. For Queen Tamar, the flame might have dimmed, but the glow never truly faded. The hush after Tamar's death lingers, but it doesn't last long. You step outside the cloistered chambers of grief and see the wider kingdom, Georgia, standing tall, its mountains catching the dawn light like sentinels. Tamar may have gone, but her reign leaves the land drenched in gold. Here's the mainstream fact: under Tamar's leadership, Georgia reached what historians often call its golden age. Borders stretched from the Black Sea to deep into the Caucasus, armies marched not just in defense, but in conquest, and trade routes funneled wealth like a river into the capital. Imagine caravans clattering through valleys with silk, spices, and coins, while merchants boast that Georgia is the safest stop on the road. That reputation? Tamar helped build it. The quirky tidbit comes from later stories. People claimed the very mountains seemed greener during her reign. It's obviously poetic exaggeration, but you can't help but grin at the thought of peasants glancing at a lush hillside and saying, "Yep, Tamar did that." Georgia became more than just a kingdom, it was a legend in real time. But legacies are tricky. Historians still argue whether Tamar's personal genius built the Golden Age, or if she simply inherited a trajectory her predecessors had already prepared. Did she ride a rising wave, or did she create it? Either way, her fingerprints are unmistakable. She consolidated the nobility, outmaneuvered enemies, funded culture, and nurtured faith. Without those choices, the kingdom might never have shone so brightly. Picture the aftermath: builders still at work on frescoes, monks copying manuscripts in dimly lit scriptoria, and generals drilling troops who know they command the respect of neighbors. For ordinary Georgians, Tamar's name becomes shorthand for prosperity. Parents name daughters after her. Priests preach of her piety. Poets immortalize her in verse. She isn't gone, she's everywhere. And yet, like the golden hour that slips toward twilight, you sense a fragile balance. The Mongols loom on the horizon, though not yet pressing. Internal disputes will one day crack the polished facade. But for now, the kingdom gleams as if cast in sunlight, Tamar's crown more radiant in death than in life. You drift through this age as if in a dream, the air filled with chants, hammer strikes on marble, and the laughter of a people convinced they live in the best of times. Tamar's legacy doesn't merely crown Georgia, it crowns an entire generation with pride. You linger now in the soft echo of her name, feeling how memory stretches further than stone walls or gilded crowns. Tamar has passed, her body hidden from the world, but her spirit refuses to leave. Centuries fold and unfold, and still her legend threads through every Georgian valley, carried on the wind like a lullaby. Here's the mainstream fact. Queen Tamar remains canonized in the Georgian Orthodox Church as Holy Righteous Great Queen Tamar. Yes, she isn't just remembered as a monarch but venerated as a saint. Pilgrims whisper her prayers, churches honor her feast day, and icons capture her serene face framed by a halo of gold. Few rulers in the medieval world ever managed that leap from throne to sainthood. The quirky tidbit: in some folk tales, Tamar doesn't really die at all. Instead, she slips into the mountains, waiting like a sleeping hero. When Georgia faces its darkest hour, she will return riding at the head of an army with banners streaming and bells tolling, like some medieval mashup of Joan of Arc and King Arthur. It's dramatic, yes, but it tells you everything about how deeply her people loved her. She wasn't just a ruler, she was hope itself. And historians, they still argue whether her reign's golden shimmer was exaggerated by nostalgia, or whether it truly was one of the most dazzling moments in medieval Eurasia. Some say poets polished her into a legend far brighter than reality. Others insist the records are accurate, that Tamar's Georgia really was the jewel of the Caucasus. The debate itself proves her power. She refuses to be neatly pinned down, even 8 centuries later. You picture Georgia today, mountains rising sharp against the sky, monasteries perched like watchtowers of memory, families still naming daughters Tamar as if bestowing a blessing. Tour guides recount her victories, school children memorize her reign, and late-night hosts like me tell her story as a bedtime drift. She lives on in architecture, in language, in faith, and in the quiet pride of a nation that still calls her King Tamar, a title beyond gender, beyond time. So you stand at the end of her life's road, and yet you realize it never really ended. Tamar continues in legend, in faith, in every whispered story. Her reign was a moment when history and myth overlapped, when power wore a smile, and when a queen ruled not just with armies but with stories. And now, as your eyelids grow heavy, her story releases you, gently, like a hand letting go but leaving its warmth behind. And so, here we are, at the quiet edge of our journey. The battles have faded, the courts have emptied, and the mountains stand still under a moonlit sky. Tamar's voice is gone, yet the echo lingers, soft as a lullaby weaving through the air. You've walked with her from a hesitant young heir to a ruler cloaked in glory, and now you pause, resting, as her golden age dissolves into memory. The pace slows, and you feel the world soften. The sharp clang of armor dulls into the hush of evening breezes, the bright flicker of torches melts into the steady glow of candlelight. Even the stories themselves grow gentler, like waves retreating on a shoreline. You might picture the Queen's final smile, not fierce or commanding, but tender, one last gift for her people before she drifted into silence. Take a deep breath now. Let it settle. Imagine the scent of mountain pines, the cool weight of stone walls, the distant hum of a monastery choir. The rhythm slows, your heartbeat finding a steady calm. Remember this: history isn't only battles and crowns. Sometimes it is warmth, faith, and the simple belief that one person can hold a people together, if only for a little while. Tamar's story is proof of that, a thread of gold woven into time, still glimmering faintly tonight. As you drift toward sleep, carry that thought with you. Strength doesn't always roar, sometimes it whispers, sometimes it waits, Sometimes it lingers in legends that make the night a little less dark. So rest now, with the Golden Queen's story curled around you like a soft blanket. The tale is done, and your dreaming can begin.